Absolutely.
All right, so I just want to do a little introduction video. We have Stan Abrams, who's the chief executive over H2O Processing. Say hello to everybody, Stan.
Hello, everybody.
We have Jim Woodley. He's the chief financial officer over at H2O Processing.
Hi, Alex.
And then we have Blake, who's the chief executive over at Boost Words, responsible for assisting with marketing and structuring web presence and so forth. So we'll jump right into it. We're going to keep it light, maybe a 10-15 minute video and just do an introduction. And I guess, Stan, we'll start with you. You've been in the water business and been running businesses for a long time. How'd you get started let everyone know how you got started, your background, and interest in the water industry.
Sure. About latter part of 2009, we had a business acquaintance that Jim and I dealt with for several years that was in the water business. And we had just gotten out of another manufacturing business that we were involved in. And we were looking for other things to do. He was in a financial bind. He had done the unthinkable, putting all his eggs in one basket, going to one of the major oil companies in Wyoming, working a field to treat produced water. And they closed the field, which left him with a major bank debt that he couldn't meet. So knowing us, he came to us and asked if we could help. And we looked it over and thought, well, yeah, but he was in a bankruptcy. So what I suggested was that we buy the patents out of the bankruptcy and then bring him on board. He wanted to be a consultant, which we did. And he had 30 years experience in the business. He was a major developer of electrocoagulation, which is one of the bases of our technology, the EC, call it EC. And so what we did is we bought the patents. He had 5 patents at that time. And then we proceeded to redevelop the business, raise money, and get it launched. So we launched it in the latter part of November of 09, and we put together our first funding in the spring of 2010. What we did, though, and first thing we did was we took it from this ma and pa operation in which he had basically a hands-on kind of technology and really didn't advance it. He wasn't a big marketing person. So we decided in order to meet the market, we had to develop the system and make it more usable for both the consumer and us. And that's what we did. We just started redesigning the system, and it was by trial and error. And we'd done a few projects after that and developed it to the point that we accomplished quite a few things from 2009 into like 2014, when we applied for we did a project in Ardmore, Oklahoma. We did a fixed base operation, expecting to do some business with Exxon's, one of Exxon's sub businesses, and H2O, which is one of their subsidiaries. And that did not work out well because the partners that we involved with didn't have the contacts they said they had, and that industry kind of slowed up. So at that point, before we finished that operation, we went to the OCC, which is Oklahoma Environmental Protection Agency, and we applied for what they've never had before, which is a patent to treat oil field water and be able to put it on the ground for irrigation. And we used our system. They came out, we demonstrated it. We brought the water up to a sufficient point that they agreed to give us a permit, and we got the first permit in the state of Oklahoma for all 77 counties to treat what they call deleterious water from the oil fields to non-deleterious, and be able to use it for irrigation. So that was a major breakthrough in the water business. And with that, we got some publicity, obviously, and so there were a lot of contacts made from different people in the industry. We weren't keen on dealing with the oil industry due to the fact that they're very difficult to deal with. It's a very tight organization, and they have a lot of, if you're not in the family, quote, it's very hard to break in. So we had a few people come to us that were in the industry, and we developed some projects. What we found out was that there, water is very interesting. If you don't know the chemistry of water, it's very difficult to treat it because there's all kinds of water. Water is just not water. There's all kinds of different elements in it, and depending on where it's coming from. In the oil industry, they add a lot of different chemicals and additives in their drilling process, which contaminate the water and cause a lot of problems. So what we did is, by experimenting with these different waters, we came up with technologies and advanced that technology to the point that we were confident that we could treat the oil field water. And the next problem we had was that the oil companies didn't want stationary projects. They wanted moving, portable projects because as they drill wells, they move from site to site. And they had to have something that was very portable. So we developed a portable site system, and then filed patents for the portable system that we developed, which is one of our patent pendings at this point. That brought us to the point that we were able to treat frack water and drill water, process water, and the different kinds of waters that we would entail in the oil field. So that was a successful operation, and we sold the unit to one of the local service agents, MSA, who deals with the oil companies, and he decided to buy a system and represent the oil industry for us. We built that system and employed it, and we again retested for OCC to make sure that they were comfortable with the patent, and we took the water that we got at 30,000 parts per million down to 4 parts per million. So
amazing.
It wasn't only water that we could irrigate with, but it was water that you could actually drink. And so we were pretty proud of that.
I saw the pictures.
Yeah. Right. So we were real proud of that too. So we have advanced the technology to a great degree and are still advancing the technology, because as we go out there, there are industries, as you know, Alex, in Florida, there are different waters there that need to be treated. In the United States alone, there's over 2 trillion gallons a day that need to be treated of some sort of water. You've all heard of the Michigan problem, the domestic waters. We treat water for industrial, for residential. I mean, anything you want to treat water for, we do. And so, but it takes a very good knowledge of being able to adapt yourself to the different waters, because there is no panacea. There isn't one system that's going to do everything. You have to make a system that's pliable for all projects that you think you will encounter.
Yeah, so you touched on something, and I want to kind of highlight it, is that the unit you're talking about that was just retested, this was done last year. The mobile unit was completed and operational last year. There's a little bit of, we'll go over the costs and stuff like that with Jimmy, but that unit is not even the latest iteration, right? Because we're working with the other group. We won't mention their name at this particular time, but our friends over there out of Texas, that we're expanding on that capability as well to take in even a wider variant of water, which seems odd to say, but now that we've been working so closely together, it's really interesting to find out all the different things that water is made up of. It's not just, everybody's familiar with hydrogen and oxygen, but the particulate matter that can really affect the makeup of the water and its ability to be processed or cleaned. As you said, deleterious water to non-deleterious water. So the one thing I would like to get into, just to touch on, is that this mobile unit, which is 3 semi-tractor trailer, what are they, 54 feet, those tractor trailers?
Yeah.
54-foot tractor trailers. So 3 of those, and then essentially a bus, which is the mobile operations center. And then you can add certain apparatuses to that as well. But I also think we should kind of touch on the fact, the ability to put in a maritime unit, or even a fixed place unit. So if you had a lake, which is something you and I have discussed, taking a look at various lakes around the country, one very large one here in Florida, you could have a mobile unit on the side, on the shore, or you could have fixed units on the side, as well as working in tandem with the maritime units and exponentially increasing your ability to process and treat water. So if you just go on the capability, the capabilities of, just touch on just a little bit, the capabilities of the maritime platform, because I think people need to understand it's more than just one thing.
Yeah, well, we also have on our website some video that we did when we treated the water for the major oil spill but down in Louisiana. And that led us to develop a mobile unit, which would be barge operated. So we could actually put our entire system on a barge, go to sea, go to a lake, go to any major water size unit and treat that water on site. We were one of the few, and probably one of the only one or two in that lake spill, in the ocean spill, that treated the water so that it could be used again, reused again in the ocean. Coast Guard has very high, strict specifications down to 20 parts per million. So anything over 20 parts per million can't go back into the ocean. And that's a high spec to meet. And we did meet it. We met it very easily. And they were impressed with us, but nobody in the oil spill wanted to clean up the oil spill. So nobody did anything because they didn't want to know how much oil actually got spilled to pay the penalties. The penalties were all based on the per barrel spill.
Right.
So we have developed a mobile unit that can go either on barges or on floats in lakes that are smaller. Of course, it would be floats, and we could actually treat the water on site at the water and remove the sludges and the different contaminants of the water.
Right at the source. That's impressive. So, Jimmy, if you don't mind, so if we could just go over, because I know some people are going to want to know costs. I don't want to get too specific with costs, and I don't want to get into any future business that we're currently reviewing, any relationships with customers. I just want to kind of touch base on the existing product, that platform, and where we're going to be moving on as far as timeline. So the mobile unit was completed at a cost of around what last year?
Yeah, about 2.1.
2.1. So those units are about 2.1 million, and we're operating what kind of margins on average? I know it varies, and I want to specify this. So on these units, they're almost a custom built, essentially, depending on the type of water. But the average targeted margin on those units?
30. Yeah, about 30%.
30%. And that's just cost on the equipment. What we're really looking at doing is providing a service to manage on-site operations and treatment of water. And we would do that now, of course, this is going to change depending on site, but per barrel is what we would charge, correct? Or gallons?
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. Gallon or barrel, whichever. Yeah, I mean, some industries are using barrels, some are using gallons.
And on average, what are those costs as far as what we would charge for that?
Well, on a gallon basis, you can get by, depending on your energy cost, for 2 or 3 cents a gallon to treat the water. If you have high energy or high labor costs, well, it's going to go incrementally higher or lower depending on those variables. But there are only a few variables. Your chemistry costs are fixed. Most of your operating costs are fixed. And so if you're using power, generator power, then you're looking at what your diesel cost is. And that's your variable. So there's not a lot of variables running the system. There's just a lot of, what would you say, Stan? A lot of constant changing as the water changes.
Yes,
especially if you're some collection site where you're getting batches A, B, C, D, and they're all becoming one homogeneous volume of water. I mean, you may be making significant changes or just tiny incremental changes to treat the water to maintain the standards that one needs to maintain.
Now the margins on the per barrel or per gallon, what are they roughly running?
Yeah, you're basically, if you took $1 and said you had $1 revenue, you're probably going to have about 30 to 33 cents to the bottom line.
Okay. Oh, good. So that gives everyone an idea that we're operating in within acceptable margins. And we're going to go into future operations at a later date. I don't want to go into that right now. That's a much more involved conversation with things going on in the future. So what would you say, taking into consideration the interest level in the platform and the ability to deliver this, what would you say has been kind of that recipe for success for this particular technology being delivered? Not just, I don't want to focus just on oil industry because it's across the board, right? So
Yeah.
what would you say that recipe for success?
Oh boy, that's a tough one to say. The fact of the matter is that there's like Stan said, so much water that needs to be treated, and we haven't hit 0.1% of what the market is. I mean, the market is gigantic, and we're really tiny compared to the scope of what needs to be treated in this country, let alone globally. And the global
globally, we've had some pretty.
Yeah,
we've had some pretty good conversations about the global market. That's just, you know.
And we're the size of the company we are. We just don't have the resources to even, think about, stepping into the bigger pond. We're still in a little tiny lake as a business, and we just don't have the wherewithal, to step into that big league, if you will.
Yeah, and that's what we're working on now. That's part of the expansion of the company and. Increasing some of our resources to make sure that we can expand H2O operations, a few other subsidiary operations, and that's the whole point of what we're doing. So that's interesting. And Stan, I want to ask you kind of the same question. When developing this took off pretty quick, relatively speaking, right? There was a lot of interest generated right away, and I think it's a lot to do with the fact that so many people were trying it, but they were going about it the wrong way. And you come along, and next thing you know, there's a lot of interest. And really, in the beginning, people doubted it until you're standing next to the machine and you see this water go in that you don't even want to stand next to, never mind drink. And then it comes out and everyone starts drinking the water. The video, the pictures you sent me when you were on site last year was just, it was impressive. You know how I am about my drinking water and everything. I'm a little anal about that, but I was impressed. I mean, 4 parts per million, when the minimums, the state requirements are 500 parts per million, right? That's the acceptable, and we're at 4. So what did you find to be, I won't say the magic bullet, but the recipe for success in that area?
I think once we understood the water chemistry and knowing the ability of our equipment, what we could do, it takes like, well, the reason we have 3 trailer fulls of equipment is because it takes different parts, pieces. You can't treat water with one particular thing. The problem has been, if you talk to anybody in the oil field and said, well, we're using RO, they would laugh you out of there. They'd say no, because every RO that's ever been in the oil field has collapsed within the first day.
Yep.
The reason being is you have to pre-treat these waters before you ever go into these other systems. And we have EC, we have filtration, we have things like DAFs, we have a variety of different equipment. And when we get into things like high salt content, which is tremendous in some of these oil fields, it goes from as low as a few thousand parts per million to 200,000-300,000 parts per million. I mean, that's like a water in the Dead Sea, that you can walk on. So you need to be able to treat that. And with associations of one of our major players that we deal with and ourselves, we're developing that process because we understand it. You can't fix a problem unless you understand what the problem is.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so with the water, what I think's been exciting for us is taking it from when we first got involved with buying the patent in 2009, is that it was very pinpointed as to what it could treat. And we felt it had a lot more abilities to potential to treat these different varieties. But in order to do that, we had to do something about developing different technologies. And one of the other major things I think that excited everybody was the ability for us to develop automation.
Oh yeah.
You really need the automation. If we didn't have automation, it would take a very large crew to operate this system on a daily basis because it has to be watched. It run and again, we keep talking about oil fields, but even in municipalities, you're going to put a system in that runs 24/7. So you need to be able to respond to that. So we now have the ability with our automation to control it from any sort, from your phones for your, as the new
Yeah,
technology.
remotely.
Right. All your remotes, as and you're doing in any industry, we've developed that with the water. And that's a major breakthrough because we can see the changes, as Jimmy said, as the changes come in on the water, because you start out with one water, and by the end of the day or in 2 hours later, you might have a different problem. So you need to know what those problems are, and you need to be able to react with it quickly. And that's what our automation has done. So we've developed that. For being a small company, as Jimmy says, we have very talented people with us. One of our engineers on site does tremendous artwork and works with the SolidWorks program that we use for 3-dimensional. So we can see what we're doing. We can see our flows. We can interpret what we're trying to achieve. And then knowing the chemistry, and we work with a couple of really good chemistry background people, so we understand how to treat that water. I mean, there's all kinds of things I could throw at you that would bore you to death or confuse you, and so, well, how do you deal with it? Well, there's ways to deal with it. And another thing that people like, you mentioned some of the waters that we've looked at, and they want to retrieve some of the chemicals that are in the water. And this could be very profitable in some instances. And but you need to know how to do that because there's all kinds of things that affect the water when you're treating it that you may or may not be able to remove those chemicals for recovery. You can remove them, but whether or not they're recoverable is something else.
Yeah, we talked about that in again, with the oil side of things, being able to pull the oil out of the water and getting it back to the customer at a profit, at profit. And also other materials. You and I had talked about commodities that can be pulled out of water, depending on what's in the water and the location. So without naming any specific locations that we've been looking at, what are some of the opportunities you see in the water treatment industry? Again, let's not get too specific to any location. I know we're looking at quite a few and talking to a few folks, but what do you see some of the opportunities in a general sense?
Well, in the last several years, we've done a lot of mobile testing. We had a unit that we used to go around, and we found like municipalities. It's pretty exciting. There's right now in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of municipalities that do not meet the basic requirements for drinking water. And it's not publicized as Flint was publicized, but they're a lot worse than Flint. Okay, here in Denver alone, because of the mountains, we get a lot of our water from the mountains. Well, they are leaching uranium, and and right now the latest tests show that they're above their normal limits for uranium. Well, we can go out into these sources and treat the water before it ever gets to the municipalities. Most of the municipalities that get cited do not have the money to upgrade their systems. So we could go in and we can do an annexation to their system for a lot less money and bring them in compliance. So that's an exciting avenue for a lot of municipalities. Same thing goes with a lot of companies. There's a lot of industries now that are they're not allowing these people now to dispose of the water that they're using in their treatment in their processes. So they have to go to great expense of finding ways to get rid of this water. And so there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, there's just opportunities everywhere you look that people need to treat this water. And it's something we can do. We can do it easily. We can build small units, large units. It just depends on what the needs and the requirements are. So we're pretty excited about it. To add one thing, Alex, I just received, and we belong to an association in Colorado here for reuse. And I just received an email yesterday that we were invited to meet with this meeting that's coming up with the University of Colorado. And this is being done around the country for reuse. They're actually now setting up departments in the universities to teach their engineering people how to reuse water. And the interesting thing about it is they list about 5 items that they think are going to be necessary in retreating that water. We already do that. So it's easy for us to go in and give a speech or a talk or teach some people what we're doing in water. but it's really significant. And now that the universities and the environmentalists are picking up on what do we do to get reuse? Because if they don't, we're not going to have water.
Yep.
There's too many issues that's going on with the water. It's not going to be potable. It's not going to be drinkable for people.
Yeah, that actually, that's kind of a good segue for Blake. Want to bring Blake in because he's going to help with the marketing side of things over at Boost. When you, and you're aware of a lot more than what we're discussing here, Blake, but when you look at what we're talking about today, when you hear this conversation, what are your thoughts on the marketing and where do you see the opportunities to expand on that existing business?
Yeah, I mean, number one for me is awareness, right? I mean, obviously, clean drinking water availability around the world, is already an issue. But I think what, a lot of people are not aware of is just what we're talking about here is what kind of technology is currently available that, I mean, we're not even talking about a lot of money in comparison to what a lot of these environmentalists spend. I mean, you've seen some of the stories, I'm sure. So, by bringing our awareness, to the mainstream, into the limelight and really showing how this works, how easy it is, and how relatively low cost it is. I mean, when you're talking about quality of life and, I mean, American citizens not having clean drinking water, like that's just a crying shame. I mean, there's kids drinking that stuff and it's terrible. And the amount of money they're spending other things on right now when they could be spending it on this, as soon as that awareness gets out there, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, how many of these things can you make? I mean, that's really where, you get to that point very quickly.
Well, it's good as a first response unit that can be brought on site when you have things like Hurricane Katrina that would have benefited from having a unit down there. And also Michigan, as has been mentioned a couple times here, but also putting in fixed units to facilitate or bolster existing municipalities treating water. Stan and I have had many hours of conversations. I won't name specific municipalities, but there's a few of them out there that are so over capacity exponentially that they're doing whatever they can to figure out a solution. The problem is that a couple of them, they can't afford to do anything. So dealing with us from that side. So we have a few ideas on how to tackle that. And I think that's going to be a good marketing ploy as far as including it into the business model. Stan and I have had many conversations about that as well. But moving forward, and also taking into consideration the current health crisis, when they're worried about this being passed through municipalities, waters and services. When you look at the awareness side of it, what about targeted marketing? Because this is not something, your neighbor down the block's going to order. You're talking about essentially local and federal government resources. So
right.
Targeting those, maybe talk a little bit about your capabilities with targeting and getting it. Because you mentioned this in one previous video, which I think many people don't get, because I didn't get it until you explained it to me. You're not marketing the government. You're trying to get to the guy working in the government office that's going to make everybody aware of it. So
well, and that's part of it too. I mean, yes, the government employees need to be made aware of it, but let's be real here. Like, what gets the government to spend money, right? And that's enough people making enough noise that they tell their state senators or their congressmen or whatever that this is an issue and it's not going to go away unless you put a bill forward and you set aside some money and you make this real. Well, okay, great. How's that happen? Well, okay, let's say we go to, what's that? I forget the name of the website. I've been to it before. It's like waterreport.org or something like that, where it shows you all the way through.
I remember that.
It's disgusting. I mean, I looked at your hometown and was like, I can't believe, the stuff that's in that water, but it's nationwide. I mean, New Jersey, for example, is like terrible. I had a previous client who was selling water, in-home water purification stuff up there. And that's how I got aware of it. And I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, I barely want to wash my hands with my sink water. It's so disgusting, right? So it's about bringing those reports to light, right? And that's done through social media. That's done through geographic targeting. That's done through paid media on different outlets. I mean, there's a variety of things that you want to weave this web together of this story, and then ultimately you let it grow organically. I mean, it's not like we're trying to shove something down people's throats here. It's like, hey, is it too much to ask for clean drinking water? Right? Like, it's really like a basic human right at this point. And, you know, we've already.
It should be.
Well, yeah, it should be, right? And some of these areas that these problems are happening, they're not poor areas. You know, it's not that a lot of them can't do anything about it. It's just no one's making enough noise about it, right? Or they're putting it back on the people saying, no, go buy your own home individual, you know, purification system. You know, why should we spend all this money, right? So, you know, again, it's about making enough noise, you know, and getting the right people involved in those local areas, you know, until you get what you want.
So that's kind of touching on what I'm talking about. You know, the clean water should not be a socioeconomic issue, which is why you're looking at more of a social platform to create that awareness so that people understand what's going on and the buck isn't passed, so to speak. And that's probably, I think, a pretty significant point that as a company we're looking at making, getting people, educating people and making them aware of what's going on, and kind of recruiting them into the efforts to bringing tech forward. Because it's not, I know, you know, Jimmy and I just talked about some of the costs, that people are going to hear numbers, you know, it's $2 million and it could be more or less, or it's a lot of money. But when you're talking about, when you take a look at the operational expenses and budgets for water treatment in the country, that's a drop in the bucket. It's very small. So imagine if you could put a fixed unit in place, and that's, you know, there's some, I'm sure Stan can elaborate a little bit here, but when you're looking at making things smaller so they fit into a mobile unit, things get expensive. So if you put a fixed unit in place to help to, let's say, bolster existing treatment facilities, things become much more palatable financially. And that's what part of the marketing that we're looking at, you and I have discussed, with moving forward that agenda. So people in government, the individual can bring it into that group and say, you know, this is probably a better solution. I mean, we are a better solution, is 100%. Coming from me, it's obviously sounds biased, but it is a fact. So, but I wanted people to have a little bit of insight as to how we're going to tackle the marketing. A lot of this doesn't really need to be marketed. You know, it sells itself within the industry, but I'd like to make other people aware of it. So, and that speaks to a couple other things that you and I discussed with UAT when we look at some of the green technology, incorporating that, some other things. So, and bring that awareness about. So, Stan, I wanted to ask you, 2021's here. 2020 is gone. It's done. So, what are the things you're most excited about for this year? Don't let the cat out of the bag. I know we're working on some things, so don't tell them. We've got to keep the surprise there a little bit. We're going to be making announcements in the coming weeks and months. So, but what are you most excited about without getting too specific about people?
Well, I think, again, going back to like what the University of Colorado is doing, and it's educating people. And as you know, Blake, if you don't have to educate people as to why they need clean water other than drinking, but all the other problems that exist out there, we feel the opportunities coming up in 21 are going to be really larger because the environmental thing has taken off and has been putting a lot of pressure on the social media for both companies and individuals to understand they got a problem, they have to treat it. In another industry that we were in before we did the water, we were in the alternate energy business. And one of the things was people, I would imagine most of the Fortune 500 companies, and we did work for some of the Fortune 500 companies, in their budget, they didn't have a line in their budget that meant anything as far as getting rid of waste. And then all of a sudden EPA came in and started closing down landfills. And all of a sudden that became a major cost to large companies. And so then they started saying, well, how do we get rid of the waste? We don't care about the energy. How do we get rid of the waste? Well, we were able to take the waste and turn it into energy, which was twofold. So they were able to get a double whammy. And the same thing's going to happen in the water industry. There's a lot of people that got wastewater that they have to get rid of in different industries. For instance, your local car wash, they can't put that wash water back in the sewer without treating it. But if they could reuse it, can you imagine the cost savings?
Oh, no.
Not only in getting rid of the waste stream that they have to pay a penalty for, but to be able to reuse the water, not buy new water. And it's a savings for everybody. And we have treated one of the largest industries out there that do wash water. So there's a lot of opportunities, and we think all we need now is to get our platform going, get a mobile unit back out there, get it demonstrated, because everybody wants to see it. Like you said earlier, Alex, well, they like the story, but can they go over there and actually drink the water when they see it go through the system? And that's pretty impressive when they do it. And I think that it sells itself once you have it in front of them. So we're pretty excited about what can happen in 21 because the demand is there. And it's just, I don't think we can create a bigger demand that's there now.
Yeah, no, I agree. You and I, we've had hours of discussions in reference to this, and that's one of the reasons we are looking at putting together a few mobile units in different locations, Florida being one of them, right?
Yes.
Out by you in Colorado and even the West Coast. So that's what's slated for 2021. We're looking at bringing these units forward into varying specifications. I know you're working with another group right now on patenting another ancillary technology for that. We'll discuss that in a later video. We can bring some of those guys on board as well. But I just wanted to give everyone a kind of a Reader's Digest version, if you will, of where we're at, what is H2O about, how it fits into the fold. There's a lot of things that H2O can do with UAT. We've been looking at evaluating that and working hand in hand with each other on that as well. So I wanted to kind of just give the shareholders a little bit of an insight, a little peek, a little taste, and then later videos will go into a few things. And I think you're right. We need to be able to show the units, and I know we've discussed that a couple of times, so we're going to be doing that, and especially in the field, watching it operate. I think people will get excited. Right now, we're the only ones that get to see everything. Shareholders get to see that. So we're going to, as you know, we're going through some structural things. We're doing our filings on the public side, working on the S1 as well. We'll have the everything squared away with OTC and submitted within about 2 weeks from now. And and funny, this morning, it was probably 6:30 in the morning. I was going through the banking records from late 2018, at the end, because we have to do the year end for 18, and then first part of 2019, I had to get those records over the top. So we're at the end of that. I've got to get some information from the transfer agent, and then we'll have that done in about 2 weeks. And then we're going to proceed with Ben over at BF Borges to finish the audits, and then we'll get to the S1, and then the rest of the year is slated towards focusing on the expansion of operations across all subsidiaries. So a lot of announcements planned over the next couple of weeks and months. So I'd like to see that unit be put together and out there for everyone to see. We're looking at, Blake and I have discussed a shareholder event. There's a town hall we want to do. We've been kind of pushing that. It's a timing thing. And they want to do a shareholder event where some shareholders can actually come out and see some of the technology from all subsidiaries. And that would be here in Florida. We just got to work on some of the logistics. That's a little more complicated, but we'll get it done. But anyway, I just want to thank everyone for their time. I know we kind of went a little longer than we originally thought. Always the case. But I think it'll benefit the shareholders and the company, so everybody knows what we're doing. So that we increase the transparency and make everyone comfortable with not what we've done, where we've come from, where we are, but where we're headed. So, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.